Welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On our episode today, we are joined by Jigyna Patel. She is sharing her experience through having fertility issues while having PCOS, being undiagnosed with postpartum psychosis, only to find out years later that that's what she was actually dealing with at the time, the struggles of having surprise twin pregnancy, and the cultural stigma that some South Asian moms might feel in relation to mental health. After she found out what she had been dealing with all those years ago and in her second postpartum, she began to learn more and volunteer for Postpartum Support International in various ways. I'm so grateful that she is sharing her story with us. Let's meet Jigyna. Welcome, Jigyna. Thank you for being with us.
Hi there. Thank you, Dr. Kat. I'm so excited to be here today.
I got to meet you in person at the PSI conference recently, which was so nice. I'm glad you were able to be there and we can meet in person. Sometimes I don't ever meet people that I talk to on here.
Right,
So,
right.
but certainly us PSI folks, we run across each other at conferences. So, anyways, I'm really grateful that you want to come on and share your story and your experience. So, I invite you to start wherever you'd like.
Okay. So 9 years ago, I got pregnant, and my husband and I had been planning for a while, but it didn't happen. I had PCOS, which was undiagnosed.
Mm.
And I decided to, after a year of naturally trying, being told I had PCOS, went through fertility. Um, the doctor said, let's do one IUI and go from there.
Mm.
So did one IUI and I got pregnant right away.
Mm.
The whole pregnancy was really healthy and happy. I had, a lot of support. My husband works a lot, so that was the only thing that stressed me out was how am I gonna, do everything once the baby's here. But I
Right.
had my mom-in-law, and then came the birth. I was 3 days over my due date, so they
Mm.
decided to induce me. On the date of the induction, I was supposed to go in a little bit later, but that morning I didn't feel that great. So we just went in right away. I
Mm.
didn't have contractions. I just had a really weird gut feeling and my back hurt a little bit. And we get to the hospital, and my OB wasn't available.
Mm.
She had an emergency in her family. So I
Mm.
had a brand new doctor to deliver me. So as they're setting me up for the induction, I guess they started to monitor the baby's heart rate and it started to drop.
Mm.
So within the early hours that I got there that morning, they decided to go ahead and give me an emergency C-section.
Mm.
And my husband and I were there. My parents were about an hour away. My family and friends, we had just told them to come by the evening. I didn't know how long the labor was going to be. And the whole time when they were prepping me for the C-section, the baby's heart rate just kept dropping, dropping, dropping. So
Mm.
my husband's face, they weren't telling me anything, was all I could see. I saw
Oh,
the worry, the stress, and the fear. And
yeah.
then they gave me anesthesia, but there wasn't enough time for it to kick in. So I felt the whole C-section, the
Oh,
tugging, the pulling,
yeah.
and the whole time I'm crying during the
Mm.
C-section. And I'm telling my husband, I'm telling the doctor, I'm feeling too much. Can you guys stop? And they're like, no, we have to save the baby. Her cord's wrapped around 2 times,
Oh,
and she's like not breathing, and
oh
she's
my
her
gosh.
heart rate's not there. So, and that's the first time they told me everything,
Uh-huh.
but leading up to it, I didn't know. And so I had my baby. Luckily, she was fine, but I felt the whole procedure.
Oh
And
my
then as soon as
gosh.
they took me, after they, patched me back up and cleaned me up, and they took me into my recovery room, and my family and friends started to visit a few hours later, one of my best friends was like, it was my birthday 2 days before. So she had seen a picture that I had sent her of my husband and I had gone out to lunch. And she was like, look at this picture and look at you now. I'm
Mm.
like, what do you mean? She's like, why do you look so drained and your color is gone? Your eyes have sunken in and you just don't look right.
Mm.
And are you okay? I was like,
Mm.
I'm not okay. This is what just happened.
Yeah.
And she's like, I just can't believe how different you look. And there were so many signs. Now, as a more informed, maternal mental health specialist, I see the signs. There was the sign of having PCOS, of going to a fertility doctor, of having a pregnancy full of stress and worry, and then this
Mm.
traumatic birth. Um, all of it were signs that I missed, that family and friends missed,
Mm.
that providers that I spoke with um, also missed. And all of this I see now could have somewhere been a conversation started to that have been different for my
Yeah.
first 3, 4 months after birth.
Right.
So I went home with the baby, and within the first 2 weeks, I fell into severe depression.
Mm.
I started to cry all day, stay in bed. I didn't want to do nothing with my
Mm-hmm.
baby.
Mm-hmm.
Both my moms were there, so they just said, okay, you need to rest and recover. You had an emergency C-section you had not been planning for. We'll take care of the baby.
Okay.
So I started to feel a little bit relief with that, but at the same time, at the end of 2 weeks, they were like, okay, now you've just been in bed for 2 weeks and you don't have any interest in your child. What now? What now?
Mm.
So that should have been another sign.
Mm-hmm.
I felt a lot of cultural pressure, a lot of stigma of how they raised their kids. They were there to help me, but they gave me 2 weeks and then they were pretty much just advising me and hoping I would get out of my funk, as we called it in those early days.
Okay.
And as time progressed, the next thing that started was postpartum anxiety. I would wake up every day with panic attacks
Oh
and
man.
like heart pounding, palpitating, can't breathe.
Yeah.
I had never experienced panic attacks in my life. And I was just like, this is like, I can't breathe. I would have to like sprint in my house. And I wouldn't go for walks. I wouldn't do anything. I would just like wait for 20 minutes before it subsided. So
Mm.
the depression and anxiety were there together, ongoing. Um, Pretty much 3, 4 weeks passed. The other thing that happened is I stopped sleeping. I was sleeping a few hours here and there, and then it went less and less and less. And I think about 20 to 25 days passed where I didn't sleep. That
At
whole
all.
first at all. I would be just lying there, and I would like start to fall asleep and wake up again.
Mm.
And I'd sleep for like 15, 20 minutes and wake up again,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was at night, during the day. And that is when the hallucinations and delusions and
Mm-hmm.
all the intrusive thoughts and suicidal thoughts started. And in this whole time, I'm sharing stuff with my husband, one of my best friends, my sisters. And I had a really good friend that was like, you need to get on medication. At the end of 1 month, she was
Mm-hmm.
like, there's too much anxiety. Just get on Zoloft, ask your GP. And I said, I was so against medication. I had no idea, what the situation would be like. I couldn't breastfeed. So I wasn't even worried about that. But I just didn't have enough knowledge. And so then eventually the only thing I decided to do was go to a therapist. And so then I started the journey with a therapist. But in the meantime, at home, my mom-in-law had to leave and my mom was just in and out,
Mm-hmm.
and I could not be alone with the baby. um, there were times at night that I'd be walking with her feeding her, and I would imagine hitting her head against my 4-poster bed
Mm-hmm.
or hitting her head against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
One day my husband was home. He worked a lot, but whenever he was home, he would be like, go for a drive, go for a walk. I was on a drive on my local highway, and I had vivid imaginations, like vivid images of my car flying over the freeway. And I called my sister immediately and I was like, holding onto the wheel, and I was like, I don't know if I
Mm-hmm.
want to do this, if I should do this, but something is telling me to do this. And she
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, stay on the phone with me, go home. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I want to do this. And so I had never had suicidal thoughts before, so I didn't know if they were real, if those what I really wanted. She guided me home, and once I got home, I told my husband what happened, and he's like, okay, we're gonna move you in with your parents. So my 2-month-old baby and we moved in with my parents an hour away from where I lived. My husband stayed behind because our business was near where we lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really hard, saying bye to the life I thought I was going to have.
Yeah.
And it was really hard for him as well. But at home, once I got home, my mom and my sister, they just took over. They were like, okay, you go see your therapist, you work on yourself, we'll take care of your baby.
Did you
And
at that sorry if I can pause you for a
yeah,
second. At this point were how I guess aware were you that you weren't like yourself, feeling like yourself?
at that point, I was finally realizing that this was definitely some sort of postpartum depression. I had a little bit of knowledge on it. My sister, who had a child 10 years before, she had the baby blues. And I had so many people tell me,
Hmm.
this is not you. This is not like you.
Like
You know,
your behavior, how you were during that time was just a departure from who you normally were.
100%.
Okay.
I was so confident. My whole pregnancy, my husband was nervous. He's an only child. And I kept telling him, I helped my sister raise my nephew. I was with her when he was 3 months. I know about all the different things with little babies. I mean, and then in general, I'm a very organized type A person. So and we had planned for everything. And
Mm-hmm.
it just, as soon as all my symptoms started, I was weak. I was forgetful. I had no hope.
Mm-hmm.
I just kept crying and worrying. Am I going to be myself again? When is it
Mm-hmm.
going to get better? Am I going to love my baby? I would see my sister playing with my 3-month-old baby on her lap and calling her nicknames. And I'm like, I didn't even know. I was like, is that my baby or is that your baby? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I have no desire to do what you're doing. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't have a nickname for her yet. And you do. And
Mm-hmm.
the whole time, of course, the guilt and the confusion of like, I don't know what I'm meant for. Like, is this, I wasn't supposed to do this. Why did we do this? And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, those 3, 4 months, I stayed with my parents only 6 weeks. And in that time, I went on medication in the end, and I did see the therapist. Zoloft really helped me. It kicked in, and then within 2 weeks, I felt better.
Mm-hmm.
Not 100%, but the anxiety and the panic attacks. And then
Were you able to
after
sleep at your parents' house?
it came slowly. It
Mm-hmm.
came slowly. I started meditation. I would do the sleep apps, and they would
Mm-hmm.
tell you how to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So I tried everything. My
Mm-hmm.
sister, at that time, she was available to help with my baby and with me. I mean, she was like, start journaling, start reading,
Mm-hmm.
go for walks, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole time it was nice now that I think about that I had that, but in the moment I was just like feeling so guilty, so horrible that I even had to rely on my family.
Right. Right.
And so I was just looking for the day that I could move back home. And then when I did move back home, I was still on medication, starting to gain my confidence back, starting to get sleep again. And I didn't really enjoy my therapist too much. So slowly I stopped seeing her. And I would say it was about at 5 or 6 months that I finally felt, when the baby was 6 months, that I finally felt like myself a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, I'm going to do this and we're going to keep moving forward. And when she turned a year old is when I could say I was finally free of all the symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
because the anxiety was still here and there, depressive
Yep.
thoughts here and there. And I didn't want to have any more kids after that. But my husband was like, you know what? Let's have one more. Let's have one more. And I didn't spend too much time thinking about those 4 to 6 months until I decided to get pregnant again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of research about postpartum depression, anxiety, and whatever I went through. So I get pregnant again. We decided to go through the fertility route because I was much older, and we did one more IUI, and I got pregnant with twins. Not expected, and we were not going for that at all.
Right.
And I went into deep depression during the pregnancy this time.
Yeah.
And that whole pregnancy, while I was in depression, I was like, okay, I need a game plan.
Mm-hmm.
What am I gonna do after I have these babies?
Mm.
Mentally, I need a game plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have my team and I have everything else set up, but what about my mental health? And that's the first time that I decided to learn about PPD and PPA. And I just did it organically. And I set up like all my ducks in terms of like what I needed mentally. And after I had the babies, this time it was a super healthy C-section. It felt great. I got a new doctor, told him everything.
Mm.
We were a team, and he like all my fears in my first pregnancy, he helped me with all of that, and the
Oh.
delivery was amazing. I when the twins came out, I felt completely opposite and looked
Mm.
opposite than I had 4 or 5 years before.
Yeah.
And then with the twins, for 3 months I struggled with depression and anxiety, but I did not have any other symptoms. And it was around that time, that first year of their existence, that I got involved looking into PSI. And when I was reading and researching all these different, maternal mental health issues, I saw a webinar that talked about postpartum psychosis. And I think that was the turning point. I had just joined PSI as a volunteer,
Mm.
and I had a realization while watching the webinar that what I had, you know, 9 years ago was also postpartum psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, it's been like something has just turned on to bring all that trauma back from years ago that I put away. And
Yeah.
my healing has just started 2 years ago
Mm-hmm.
from what happened 9 years ago.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and I joined PSI initially because I wanted to learn and read and just find out more. And then there was an opening for a volunteer position in, one place. And then before you know it, I also joined as a support group leader, then a peer mentor. And it just,
I love
every
it.
time, yeah, every time that I spoke to all the different staff members at PSI and I did some of the roles, I found myself healing and realizing and learning about everything I went through 9 years ago, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff that I had closed and didn't want to think about anymore.
Right.
And it's just been a whole, like, the whole thing has come back in full circle.
Yeah.
And these last 2 years with PSI, for the first time, especially through support groups, I'm finding a place to kind of reflect and, forgive myself and also heal finally.
Yeah.
So,
Oof, that's big.
yeah.
Um, wow. If I can, I guess what in that webinar that you saw, what were the things that you heard about that made you realize it was postpartum psychosis?
Some of the women shared their lived experiences, and they talked about the hallucinations and the delusions, having thoughts of hurting their baby and hurting themselves, not sleeping, not wanting sleep. Um, and then when they talked about, having like hearing voices or losing their speech, that happened to me as well.
Mm,
When I had my baby 9 years ago, my daughter, the weeks that I spent in my parents' house, my sister would send me for walks. And when I would go for these walks outside, I would just look at everything. And there was one morning I couldn't talk. I couldn't even remember what I was looking at. And she would send my nephew. At the time, he was 5. And so I was only allowed to walk a few houses down back and forth. And it was summer break for him. So he would come with me. And I'd look at him and I'd be like, what is that? I'm like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I don't know what that thing is. And he's like, it's a tree. I'm like, a what? And at first, I had a complete blank.
mm-hmm.
And then second, I couldn't even say that word. And then all of a sudden, that morning, everything became black and white. And that was the first time that I had stopped seeing color. Um, and I asked my nephew, I was like, what color is it? He's like, it's green. And I'm like, oh my God. And I couldn't talk. And in my mind, I was like, I see black and white. And then the only thing I could say to him was like, let's go. And then I rushed home and I got in the house and I just went in the room. And so whenever I was watching that webinar and similar and more other types of stories were shared,
Uh-huh.
that's the scene that came back to me. And it was so scary. And that's
Oh,
when I
yeah.
realized that's
I was going to ask um, how that felt. It felt scary for you.
yeah. I couldn't talk. I couldn't see color. I didn't know what it was in front of me. Oh my God. And after that is when more similar episodes happen. And that was around the time that I was like, okay, I'm going to get on some sort of, Zoloft or some sort of medication. Yeah. It was
Mm-hmm.
after scenes like that. And so when I was listening to the webinar and I was hearing more of these stories, I was like, wow, I, that's just like psychosis. And I thought that was depression.
Mm-hmm.
And when I told my therapist at the time, she also just said depression. I was like, why did nobody say you had this very real illness? If I had
Mm-hmm.
known at the time, if somebody would have helped me figure that one out, you know?
For sure.
So yeah.
Um, so you that first postpartum were can you remind me again like how long were you in that state?
Uh Probably a good 4 months.
That's a
Yeah.
long time.
Right after
So
I
it's
delivered my
like
baby.
people around you knew that something was going on. You
Yes.
internally knew something was going on, and you were talking about it. And were you telling people about what your internal experience was?
At that time, I wasn't.
Uh
There
huh.
were certain episodes, like what I just described,
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't really tell too many people at that time. I
Mm-hmm.
think I told my sister and my husband,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the time it was either just my husband or my sister that I would tell. There were a lot of things that I did not tell, that I just shut off and closed and put away until 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I finally realized that a part of myself to finally accept and just let go and move on has been talking about it and sharing
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that I never thought I would really get from PSI or volunteering in this field is the advocacy part and the speaking up part. And so these last 2 years, this whole thing started with, I just want to help, even if it's just one woman, or hey, it helps me, right? And then before I knew it, I have learned this whole new world and the power of peer support and group support and advocating for yourself
Mm-hmm.
and educating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I talk to my moms in the support groups, that's something that I tell them. And I'm like, I didn't have that postpartum 9 years
Right.
ago, or even 4 years ago when my twins were born.
Right.
And I just wish I would have, had one person in my medical professional team, or even a friend or family at the time, that could have. I discovered PSI on my own. I was up
Right.
when my twins were about 2 years old, and I was like, you know what? I want to know, why did all this happen to me? And that's
Mm-hmm.
how I learned more and more about, you know, the different ways that you can get help besides therapy and medication, you know.
Yeah. You had touched on just briefly, and I'd like to understand more um, on some potentially some cultural stuff connected to your
Mhm.
experience. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so I'm from India. I'm Indian. I've lived here. My family, we've all been here since the 70s and 80s. But in our culture, once a man and woman are married, they have kids. It's the woman. It's the woman who's going to raise the kids, whether she's working or not. It's the woman that's going to be there majority of the time. My husband and I, he was raised in England, so we both knew that we're not going to do that. We're going to, he wanted to be a part of it. He wanted to be there. He's like, this is my child too. It'll be 50-50. But we also live in a joint family with his parents. We also have my parents who were so involved. And we had a business, so he couldn't physically be there. And so, the cultural parts just came in naturally, even though we had told our parents, this is how we want to raise our kids. Um, they couldn't help but say how they raised us,
Mm-hmm.
and how they had it and how they suggest it. And they were like, well, it's all you. It's all you. It's the mom. It's the mom. At the end of the day, it's the mom. And that would just bother me, because I'm like, no, it takes two to have kids. And my
Mm-hmm.
husband wants to be involved, and he is when he can be. And it also set me up for more stress and worry that he wasn't there, something that I didn't think much about,
Oh.
but that he couldn't be there. But because I was there, it had to be all me. And that's when I was like, well, no, this is why I have you guys. It takes a village, it takes a team. And I'm not going to sit here and think I have to do this on my own. So culturally, the grandparents had to learn, and they did all these years. And I made a
Mm-hmm.
point to never, just be quiet about it or not teach them about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, luckily they were willing to learn and break the stigma that they've had, their whole life. And that was hard.
Yeah.
Initially with my daughter, my 9 years ago, that birth, it didn't really catch on to them. But after I had the twins and years of kind of them seeing and learning about, how other families and people our age are doing it, they were like, okay, okay, we see what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
So culturally, it's just, it's still, that's how it's done in India, and things are changing, obviously, but a lot of families, a lot of people my age that are of color, Indian especially, we still feel that's pressure and that stigma, and especially because we have our moms, there to
Mm-hmm.
tell us how they did it and how they think we should do it.
Right.
So
Okay. Right. So the pressure is there. I mean, it sounds like you did a lot of educating too. And I find that to be particularly difficult with adult children who are either first generation or close to it, who
mhm.
have families who are more closely connected to like how things were done kind of back home, is that
Yeah,
that difficulty intraculturally
right.
that it's just it's hard. There's no way around
Yeah,
it. It's
yeah.
just hard.
And
Uh,
they, and I for the longest was upset and used to blame all the grandparents, but then I realized they couldn't help it. They didn't
mm,
know any different or any better,
mm,
And there were others down the line who they kind of put that pressure on, but nobody said anything. And then I came along and I'm like, no, 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 let's let's talk about this, or this is how it should be or could be. I didn't do it right away,
Mm-hmm.
until my older
Mm-hmm.
one was like 1 or 2,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, that first 6 months, I just let all of that help me or not help me. All of it hurt me even more. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't speak up for myself at all those first 4 to 6 months. And I wish
Was that
something would
also
happen.
related? I mean, clearly you were struggling, so it was related to what you were going through. Um, but was there also a layer of stigma around mental health stuff in
Yes,
general?
in general, exactly.
Uh-huh.
So, there's the whole cultural aspect about how we should be how the mom raises the baby, and the mom is the main person even if the husband's there. And then it was the whole like, okay, well, you're feeling sad and upset, but that's okay, just keep it going, keep moving. It happens to all of us, it happened to us, it's
Mm-hmm.
normal, but keep it
Mm-hmm.
going. And in general, speaking about these words, postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, psychosis, no, they have no knowledge, no,
Right.
like, never even heard of it. Talking about going to a therapist, getting on medication, all of it was so like scary
Yeah.
for my parents and my in-laws. And they all learned, while I learned, you know, I had a little bit of knowledge about it here and there, but not this much. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that is, I mean, interesting. Again, it's like not the best word for this, but what you said, that they were kind of scared by what was going
Yeah.
on for you mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally,
Yeah.
too. Did they ever talk to you about what it was like for them to be scared for you, be concerned about you?
Yeah, we talked about it years later. So for my mom, she was just like, she was like, I thought it was just something temporary. I thought you'd be feeling that way for a few weeks and you'd be okay. Because she's like, you're so confident. You always knew what you wanted. She's like, there was no way that was gonna be you. And then she also said, she's like, I didn't know that there was other helps or other types of tools available for you besides, hey, we'll help you with the baby, you go sleep, you
Oh,
go
okay.
now.
Right.
She's like, I didn't realize that you could go to a therapist and get on medication, or do group therapy, or go like do like meditation, yoga. She's like, it didn't occur to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then for my in-laws, they were the same way. They were like, you know we didn't really think that you would feel this way when you wanted the baby and you and your husband like planned for it. And
Mm-hmm.
how can you like all of a sudden, and you had so much help and you had all of us,
Right.
and then how is it medical, and how does it relate to like your hormones? Because I was trying to explain everything from A
Right.
to Z the best
Right.
I
Right.
could. So yeah, they had a lot of questions down the line, but initially they were just like, we don't get what's going on. It was so scary and unfamiliar. And it wasn't me. It was such a night and day
Mm.
that they were
Mm.
like, how could you just all of a sudden snap off? Like, why did that happen? Yeah.
Yeah. Once you started to get more sleep, I assume you were coming back to yourself at that point.
Yeah. I really do think that it was like the Zoloft helped with the anxiety. That also helped with the sleep. And then I could start thinking again. The fog lifted. Um, and all of a sudden, all the fears and worries and the drama that I had created in my head started to become lighter and
Mm.
less. So yeah. And yeah, when the sleep came, it definitely, I felt different. And to this day, so I had my twins 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and we struggled with sleep the first year. And now they're 4, so they're sleeping in their own rooms, and they have
Mm-hmm.
some bad nights here and there. But I remember we sleep trained them. With my older one, we never did. And so with my twins, after we sleep trained them, and I told my husband, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like, to be with it and productive when you have enough sleep.
Right.
And it's a whole nother day that you can have, compared to when you are on no sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild how much sleep impacts our brains
Yes.
and our bodies.
Yeah.
It's hard to really understand the depth and intensity unless you've felt it,
Yes.
of that sleep deprivation. And we're not talking like 1 or 2 nights you don't get sleep. This is weeks and months.
Right. Right.
It just pushes you to like the edge of like, for you it sounds like your experience of reality, of like
Right.
what everybody else considers reality around you,
Yeah.
um, which
I
is
make
scary.
sleep a priority, a huge priority now to this
Oh
day,
yeah,
because I still have toddlers and they're up all the
yeah,
time. And so I get my naps in where I need to. I, call it an early night when I need to. I mean, it's part of my self-care daily.
yeah. It really should, it should be for everybody.
Mhm.
But once you've had that kind of experience, there's, you got to be really, I mean, you're more aware of how on top of it
Yes.
your body needs it to be. Yeah.
Right. Right. The other experience that has really stayed with me is um, when I was pregnant with the twins. I was depressed the whole pregnancy because I didn't want them.
Mm,
And I doubted myself as a mom and how am I going to do this? I only wanted one to begin with, agreed to have another one, knowing how much my husband wanted one. And my daughter at the time was 4 and she so badly wanted a sibling. And so the whole pregnancy, I struggled with so much guilt and shame and sadness and also frustration at myself because how could I not want these babies that I was growing? And how am I going to be okay with raising them? And how am I going to fall in love with them? And so I had them. And the first 3, 4 months after I had them, it was just going in the motions. It was just doing the motions. At the same time, something, as it always clicks with your child, with your children when they're born, I all that stuff that I felt during the pregnancy started to disappear. It was still here,
mm,
but not where, like with my daughter, when I had her, my single one 9 years ago, I didn't want anything to do with her for months. With the twins, day one, I'm like, I want them. Give them to me. I
mm,
want to be with them. I want to do everything I need to do for them. And I had, my parents helping me. I moved in with my parents right away because that was part of the plan. I created a whole like post birth plan because I was so nervous about being severely depressed
yeah.
afterwards. And so that was part of the plan that I would have the babies and move in with my family and I would have their help from the get go. And my older one was with my in laws at my house and she would come on the weekends with my husband. And so with the twins, like it was just so interesting how that happened. But the whole time, as I'm doing everything for them and loving it and enjoying it, I still am struggling with anxiety and a little bit of, sleep issues and depression. And the biggest thing I'm struggling with is the guilt that, oh my God, I spent my whole pregnancy not wanting them. And they are amazing. And I'm bonding with them and I'm in love. And it's exactly how it should have been 9 years ago and how it is now. So that experience, it was just baffling. And so one of the first things that happened is when I joined PSI as a volunteer, I became a support group leader for parents of multiples. And I've been that support group leader for the last year.
Mm,
And the first few months, I kid you not, how many women I met that said the same things. These women were either pregnant with twins or just had their twins. And it was really interesting because there were a couple of meetings where that particular topic never came up. And then once I shared it, it just kept coming up and up
mm,
and up. And for the first time, I told my group, I was like, I feel relief because I haven't closed that chapter yet of feeling that sadness and guilt that I didn't want them, but oh my God, I love them. And they were like, oh my God, you too? And
mm,
so that has been one of the highlights of being that support group leader for that group is
mm.
finding closure and just having each other to realize that we're not bad moms. It doesn't
Right,
define us. It
right.
didn't mean that we don't love them or didn't want the babies. Um, Having twins or multiples is a whole nother type of thing that comes with parenting and all the change and whether you and a lot of these moms were not expecting twins
Mm,
and it was surprise twin pregnancies, so many similar stories, and
mm,
some of them wanted them but still once they came couldn't manage and didn't like the change of life. And
yeah,
so that was one thing that I didn't even know that I needed closure and healing on. And this whole last year with my support groups, I'm getting it. And it's amazing. The feeling of knowing that we're all in it together, it just
yeah.
makes it like, okay, I'm not a bad person. It
Right,
happens
of
to the
course.
best of us.
Yeah, ugh, I
Yeah.
just wish we could never feel like that. That that anybody has to feel like they're a bad person for going through something like that, and
Yeah.
that we're supposed to live this like prescribed happiness life of, that we're just happy with everything. It's
Yeah.
no, that's not how it works. So that, yeah, it's awesome that there's that mutual connection in there in that group.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's, thank you for sharing it too, because it's, I think, important for people to understand on multiple levels. One, we as people, providers, professionals, quote unquote, like, yeah, we're that, but we're human. We have our
Mhm.
own experiences. So I think it's helpful for other people to know that. Um, but that, like, we are, those of us who've been through this or anything like it, are still healing.
Mhm.
There are parts that still, even for me, I'm 13 years out from the first time I experienced it. I still
Yeah.
get stuff that comes up where I'm like, oh, uh,
Yeah.
I guess that little nugget there needs some attention.
Right.
And it's a journey, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's cool
Exactly.
that you're able to share in that healing with people you're supporting.
And again, I had no idea that I would enjoy support group therapy or support group peer support so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I it has done wonders for me. And I came on as a leader, but I'm sitting there and listening to these stories and hearing all this vulnerability from these women. And again, it just
Right.
unites all of us. And
Yeah.
and at the same time, the whole like, am I meant for this? Am I a good mom? Do my kids deserve this? All of that is just like finally leaving me,
Mm.
like I'm like, oh my God, I love my children so much. And whatever I've gone through has just been that. It's just stuff I had to go through. I used to equal that to, oh, being a bad mom or I wasn't meant for this.
Mm.
But I'm finally like letting that part go.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
such, yeah, we don't need that kind of baggage
Yeah.
to carry around, that
No.
emotional stuff.
And
It's
that's so when
so
I talk
hard.
to some of these moms in my support group and they're just a few weeks out, a few months out. I'm like, I've been living with this for years. Please don't do this.
Yeah, yeah, right,
I
right,
was
right.
like, let me tell you, like,
Uh-huh.
try your best, but you don't need to live with it for years.
For
Yeah.
sure. For sure. Um, if I can go back a little bit too, just to the part where you were talking about like kind of for your with your first child, like not feeling connected or not wanting to connect. I know that's another experience that a lot of people
Mhm.
have, and for some people, it's getting connected, getting um, bonded is an active process, and for some people it just happens over time. For other people it's like a mix. um, for you, what was that like?
No, for my older one, I mean, I just couldn't, because of all the postpartum mental health issues that I was going through and just the stop in my brain, like the cloud. I mean, I just couldn't get myself to bond with her, to connect with her. Um, Even when I got on the medication and, the fog lifted and like she was 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, I mean, it was way before, like it was way after she was a year old that I finally felt like a connection with her. And that
Mm-hmm.
was another thing that I struggled with because
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, how is this possible?
Mm-hmm.
And then, as more time passed, the connection and the bonding grew. But that initial 6 months to a year where I wasn't connected or bonded to her, it still stayed with me for a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now that I have something to compare it to, because with the twins, I felt bonded right away.
Mm-hmm.
I still wonder about that part. And I know why I was that way 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's really interesting that it took so long
Yeah.
for me to eventually feel like, okay, and then when I was trying the bonding and the connecting as I got sleep and as the medication came into effect, again, it was just motions. I don't know if I truly felt it
Mm-hmm.
until much later. And I,
Mm-hmm.
I have memories of like when she turned 1 and 2 and in 3 and in between things that happened where I was like, oh my God, where you feel that little pull in your heart that I'm like, why didn't I didn't have that before for her.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'm just like, I knew it had to happen sometime, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just, I know the difference now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I do question sometimes, that even after I started to feel better mentally, the bonding came much later. We almost started I feel like her and I, our parenting journey did not start until she was, let's say, 6 to 8 months. To me,
Mm-hmm.
that's when she was born. And
Right,
that's when
right.
I was reborn. And so we've always been 6 to 8 months, up to a year behind, I
Yeah,
feel. It's just how, that's when I was finally
yeah,
awake and there for it,
yeah,
so
yeah. Yeah, it's quite a process. I think it's also good for people to know that it does happen, even with
yes,
that initial feeling of disconnection or not feeling like bonded in
yes,
that way. It can grow over time, like other relationships do.
yeah,
You get
yeah,
closer and understand them, and they get to understand you, and all of that, and the
right,
connection
right,
can
yeah,
grow.
yeah, I agree.
So I know that you're I just love that you're working with PSI and involving yourself in this way in the cause and advocacy and everything. What all are you doing within PSI and beyond in terms of work in the perinatal world?
So, like I said, when I first started with PSI 2 years ago, it was me just researching and learning about different types of perinatal mental health issues. And then the first role that I started was a local Houston support coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
So if moms connect with the helpline, and if there's a mom in my Houston area, they put me in touch with her, and I help her find resources locally. So that's the first way I got involved. And so it was just a little bit of chatting back and forth with moms and giving them some advice and some resources, and just kind of leading them to different paths that might help them. And then the second way I got involved was the support groups. And I started off just as a support group leader for parents of multiples. And then recently, I just started as a co facilitator for survivors of psychosis. So that's another support group that I just started helping with. And then after that, I also joined the peer mentor program. I was enjoying the connection with these women so much. So I found out about the peer mentor program, where you're paired with somebody for 6 months and you talk to them once a week, and kind of hear their story, and you share your story, and just like be a little bit of a support, of add more to their village. So I've been doing that for the last year too. Met some amazing women and felt some really great connections and more closure, I guess you could say, with all of these experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then the recent thing I also started was I'm on the postpartum psychosis task force. Once I diagnosed myself and I learned about psychosis, I just wanted to learn more. And
Mm-hmm.
so I reached out and got involved with the task force. And through them, I was able to get into some storytelling projects and some digital storytelling projects, and to share the specific psychosis story. And that's the first time that I learned about advocacy and what that means, and how can I, do it in my own way. So those are the different ways that I've been involved with PSI, and all of them is teaching me. So now when I talk to my moms, I call them my moms, whenever I talk to any of these women that I'm a
Mm-hmm.
volunteer for, is I tell them that educate yourself about your symptoms, your conditions, and speak up to all of your medical providers. Someone, so I forgot to mention an important thing. My pediatrician 9 years ago, when I went in for my daughter's 6 week checkup, she was the only medical provider at the time who was like, I think you might have PPD.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was because I was telling her, and I was telling her, and I was telling my OB, and I was telling my GP, but she was the first one to be like, can I assess you for it? And I'm like, oh, okay. What do I have to do? She's like, fill out these 5 questions. I totally forgot about that. And that was so important to me. And she's still
Yeah.
my twin's pediatrician and my
Mm-hmm.
daughter's pediatrician. So I tell
That's
her all the
awesome.
time. So that was part of the things. I always tell the moms that speak up to all your medical providers. Somebody will be like, okay, hold on, red flag. We want to assess you,
Mm-hmm.
evaluate you, and get you some further help.
Such a good
And
point.
then, yeah. And then the third thing that I always tell my moms is um, look into group support and peer support. There's so much power in being with each other and talking and sharing and learning from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Again, something I didn't have 9 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
all of this would have just made a difference in my postpartum journey, and, would have helped in different ways. And so that's something that I have learned through PSI. Like all of these things, once I joined and I just saw the amount of resources that were available,
Mm-hmm.
for moms, and most of them free, all of them free, really. And there's no way that something will not work or click. There's something available that can help you and get you in the right direction. If not, directly, then get you going where you need to be in your local city. So I feel like that's the message that I want to keep giving. And that's another reason why I keep going with PSI. And through all of this, I have changed, my mind on what I want to do with the rest of my life. My background is in public relations, events. We have our own small business. But these last 2 years, I'm like, no, I'm going to go back to school, get my master's in counseling. I want to work with women. I'm applying for my certification with perinatal mental health within PSI.
Nice.
And I started volunteering for a local Houston hospital, and they're interested in me coming on board as a perinatal mental health advisor and coordinator. And so it's finally all coming into place, and I'm just thankful that I took what PSI had to offer and just went with it and continue to go with it. And I'm thankful that I finally found all of this. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. It's awesome. And so important to know that healing can happen anytime.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be right when it's happening, although that'd be great
Yeah.
to get the help during that time. But really, like, there's still so much healing available, even if it happened years ago.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a really, really important. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your story and your passion. It just comes through so clearly how invested you are in helping other people who are going through stuff like this. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. I appreciate it. And people like you inspired me, and so many people in PSI have inspired me. And I feel like I didn't think I could do this work, and I didn't know if I had, the experience or the knowledge or the credentials. But I have the lived experience in the heart, and I just don't. Too many moms are suffering, and
Absolutely.
yeah, we all need to just come into together to provide each other whatever resources and help we can, because motherhood, can be different. And if it's not, then whatever you're going through, you can be helped. You don't have to stay in it, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kat.
Please do connect with Jigyna on Instagram at Jigyna525. And certainly, she went over a lot of the support services that PSI offers. But if you are looking for either support yourself or you're looking to get into volunteer work or advocacy, you can go to postpartum.net and look into the support groups that PSI offers, as well as many of the other free resources. Please come and find me on Instagram at Mom and Mind. Like and share those posts, and also like and share this podcast. And this is the best way to help support the work that I'm doing here and to ensure that more and more people get access and learn about this podcast as a resource. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time.